Thank you very much for joining. So today we've come to our third tutorial where we're going to look into developing a computer program to a client brief. So we've been given with two mandatory learning outcomes, and then we have a merit and a distinction task. So without any further ado, let's dive into our session. Okay, so in today's session, we will look into how to set up our environment, and then we will introduce variable concepts like variable, loops, calculation, working with files and classes as well. So we've been given a case study, a scenario, and as a computer developer, we need to develop a computer program that meets our client brief. So this will outline the steps taken to create a task management app for mobile devices using Python. This section will now detail the actual implementation process, including setting up our development environment, coding the application, testing and deployment. So as per our client brief, the client requires a mobile app, task management app to help users organize and track the daily tasks. So this app should allow users to add, edit, and delete tasks, set deadlines, and mark tasks as completed. So the user interface should be intuitive and suitable for mobile devices. So first thing first, we need to be able to set up our environment. So it is important for us that we have Python installed in our machine. So we can now navigate to python.org, and we have to download the latest version of Python. Once this is downloaded, we can now check which version we have installed through our command prompt, where by simply typing Python-v capital letter or Python version, it now shows the version that we have installed in our machine. Then when it comes to our IDE, there are different type of IDE, such as Eclipse, Visual Studio Code, which is the most recommended. Once this is installed into our machine, we can now create our files with our .python extension, where we will now going to have the ability to create our first Python code. So here we have an example where this file will now be called app.py, and here we have an example where they're going to import from Flash, and so on. We have more code. So for example, we have a function here where it's going to where it's called index. Our function now has our variable called tasks, and is now using a Python library which allows us to make a query, and we are now going to return a value. So the value that we want to return into is called render template, and the parameters that we're going to return are a string, which is our index.html, and also our variable tasks. Also here we have the ability to edit our task, where we're going to call our integer. We have now the method to get and post, and again we're going to use our task variable to call in this query, which allows us to get our ID. Also here we have our function to delete values from our tasks. Here's the code where it shows us the command, and we're now going to return a value with the parameter of our URL for the index. Model.py is another file where with this code we're now going to get from our Flash SQL Academy. We're going to now import our SQL Academy, and within our class we have our parameter that's going to pull from our database, and this is what the query looks like. We have our IDE with the parameters that are going to retrieve integers from the primary key, which is set as true. Then we're going to retrieve the title from the database, and also the description and the deadline, and also when it's completed. Also, when it comes to creating our front end with our user interface, we're now going to set up a index.html file where we have our boilerplate that gives us our HTML file, and here's the code that we're going to insert. We're going to link our Python code to our HTML file. So we can see from the URL, we're now calling our add task function. And also we have included into our list, we can see we have a list where in our list we have our edit task and delete task. We now have also a template for our add task.html, where again we have our in our header we have add task, and inside we're now going to import all our application that we already declared. Here are more code example of how this is going to look like. Also, it is important to have the ability to testing, where we're going to ensure that the function are working properly. So we have unit testing, integration testing, and user acceptance testing. So what are these used? With unit testing, we're going to test individual function and methods to ensure that they work as expected. Integration testing is we're going to ensure that there is different parts of the app that work together correctly. And lastly, we have user acceptance testing, where with this we're going to test the app with the real user to get a feedback and identify any usability issues. Here are more example of how we're going to set up our testing environment, where again we're going to import our database, and we will now have our class, which is now called task test case, and we're now going to set up our functions, and these functions allow us to test by pulling from our database the values that we're requesting. This is, again, when it comes to testing, we're now going to add our task that we first initiated for our app, and we're going to see if this, we're going to run a test to see if this gives any error with our unit testing. Deployment. So once the app has now gone through our testing phase, we can now able to deploy into our production environment. So this will now involve setting up our web server, for instance, and we're now going to configuring a database server and ensuring that the app is accessible over the internet. So we have example of deployment using Unicorn. So now we know that developing a computer program to meet a client brief will now involve understanding the requirement, setting up development environment, coding the application, testing and deploying it. So in this example, we can see that the task management app was developed using Python and Flash, following the structured approach to ensure that it is now going to meet our client needs. So in our 3.1, we're now going to implement solution in line with the design to meet the needs of our client, demonstrating an understanding of approach coding standards in Python. So when it comes to implementing the solution to meet our client brief, we need to be able to develop a task management app which meets our client brief. And here now below we will demonstrate the implementation covering the key topics such as programming, constructor, validation, and so on. So the key topics are going to be programming construction, validation, PEP 8 style guide compliance. So when we're looking into our constructor, the task management app will now going to be implemented using standard programming constructor, which they're obviously going to include variables, function, loops, and conditional statement.
Hi, Victor. Just letting you know I'm here. Sorry, I'm here late, but it looks like I got here just in time for you to start 3.1. So just letting you know I'm here.
Hi, John. Yeah, because I just wanted to record them, make available to you.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so looking back to our 3.1 learning outcome, so we now introduce constructors. So our program need to include, in our constructor, we need to include variable, functions, loops, and conditional statement. So here again, we have an example of our app.python file. And by analyzing it, we can see that the code has to now configure to our database. And we'll now have the values added. So here is how our constructor is going to look like, where we're going to create tables, and we have to have the ability to return our render template through our index.html file. Also, again, we have to have the ability to get and post by creating another constructor, which we're going to define this as add task, and we'll now have conditional statement, and with if request method, we're going to now make it equal as post, give it a title with its own description, and lastly also having a deadline. So here's more, here's how we're going to retrieve these values from the database. And we're now going to return this parameter into the index. Okay, models.py. So here is how our class is going to look like. So we're going to retrieve from our database model, and we now have an ID with its title, description, and deadline as well. Variable, as we all know, this allows us to add values, integers, doubles, boolean, and so on. So we have validation, which is crucial to ensure that user input are correct and secure. And here we have an example of how this validation has to be done through our function, where again we now define our function with add task, and we have again a method which we're going to use to post. We have title, description, and deadline again. So when we see hashtag, we're basically making a comment, and this comment says that we're going to declare our validate input, and if this doesn't meet the deadline, we're now going to return a value. So we're going to return a string that says that title and deadline are not required fields. So we're now going to say try by pulling a new parameter from datetime dot string strp time, and that's the new value that's the new parameter that will now be pulled. And also we need to have an exception. We throw in an exception and this is going to return again a value where it says invalidate format, and it shows you the correct date format that has to be used. So again, here we have more example of how to use validate input, where again we've been given another example where if this value is not the deadline, we're now going to return title and deadline are required field, where we're going again to throw another exception with a new value. PEP8 star guidance. So this is going to ensure that the code it's readable, maintainable, and consistent. So we need to have naming conventions. We need to follow naming conventions when it comes to variable and functions. So there are nice extensions that we can use installing our VS Studio Code, such as Prettium, which makes our code readable and tidy and organized. So here, variable and function use lowercase with words separate by underscore. While classes, we always have the first letter of our new word as a capital letter. So again, we have examples for it where by creating one new function, we put add underscore tasks, and we have our parentheses for our parameters. Code layout. So we have maximum line length, which is 79 characters. Blank lines, where they're going to be separating top level function and class definition with 2 blank lines. So when it comes to methods, these method definition inside the class are always separated by a single blank line. Again, underneath we have an example for it. Also, we have use for space for indentation level. And here again is provided an example for it. Inline comments. So again, we mentioned we could use hashtags to comment whenever. So for example, if you're working in a team and someone else has to work with your code, we can now put this hashtag to ensure that these are now commented, and this is not going to impact our code because just comment as a reference. Block of comment, again, start with the hashtag and continue with them subsequent line with a closing hashtag and a single space. So again, we have an example where we can see that our developer added a comment saying that this is a block comment describing the function below. And he also commented our function. White space in expressions and statement. So to avoid extraneous white space, we do have example of here when it comes to using where we using expression and statement. We can use this hashtag to show that this is incorrect or maybe is correct. So now we can summarize what we've said, where when it comes to programming constructor, we have variable function loops conditions, and these are now essential for building our app functionality. Validation, again, we looked into defining these functions. Naming conventions, we explain how this has to be done. Code layout, we looked into the maximum length for it. Identification, we looked into the 4 space per level. And also we looked into commenting on how the hashtag is used. So to conclude this learning outcome, implementing the task management app in line within the design is now involves using appropriate programming constructors, validation, and adhering to the PEP 8 style guide. 3.2, so apply validation to improve integrity of input. So what does this mean? Validation is essential to ensure that inputs provided by users are accurate, appropriate, and secure. So these steps ahead will now enhance data integrity and prevent error during application execution. So what are these steps? We have to look into input validation, where role of version control software in development activities. So we have input validation, where we check in the correctness and appropriateness of our data entered by the user. So for example, if we have like an online gateway where we have to accept payment, we have to have this sort of validation where if the user entered instead of 16-digit code, they entered 20. Our program have to have the ability to validate and see if what the user entered, the values entered by the user matches the required criteria. So this is an example of validation. So here we have types of validation such as presence check, data type check, format check, range check. So range check is what we explained, such as user entering wrong bank card details, for example, when they're trying to purchase online. Presence check, ensure that mandatory fields are not empty. So whenever we fill in online form and we have mandatory fields, with presence check, we need to validate that our users entered all the mandatory fields. Data type check ensures that the data entered is of expected type. And format check, so we're ensuring that the data entered matches specific format. For example, if we enter in an email and the @ is missing, with the format check, we should have the ability to identify that something is missing. Validation implementation. So we have now our function, which allows us to perform our validation. And here's the code where we define our tables, where we're going to create our tables. We're now going to define our index and also again add task. Also, we will now have function to validate, and we have to throw an exception to ensure that there are no error, and we'll now return a parameter where it's going to include our function, which is add task. Again, these are odd example of methods used for validation. Here we have again our boiler template for our HTML file, and we now need to also link our HTML file to our cascade sheet and also to our Python file. Here now we have role of version control software in development activities. So what is version control? So version control softwares are essential when it comes to modern programming. So I hope you guys are familiar with Git. This allows multiple developers to work on, they could work simultaneously on the same project, and you now keep track of changes and maintenance history of modification. So as I said, Git is the most popular version control system used nowadays. So what the benefit of version control system? This gives collaboration where multiple developers can work simultaneously on the same project. History and tracking, where we have documented everything that has been changed within our project. Branching and merging, where developers can now create branches to work on one features or fixing bugs independently. Backup and recovery, so by uploading our files into our repository, into our Git, we now have multiple versions of it, and we now able to recover them in case these files are gone missing. We can also review the code because this is now available for many developers to look into and improve. So again, Git can now be downloaded from the official website and installed into our machine. And we can now run these codes from our command prompt, where here the simple code for us to initiate Git. Also, we can create a new bash, new branch, sorry, and that's the code for it. Merge branches back to the main one. Push changes to remote repositories. So to summarize, we've looked into presence check, we looked into data type check, formatting check, range check, and also version control softwares such as Git. So to conclude, input validation, by implementing this, it now gives us significant improvement to the integrity of our input when it comes to our task management app that we require to build from our client brief. Now we've come to look into our our merit task, where we have to have the ability to demonstrate Git repository command and the purpose. So demonstrating Git repository command and the purpose is now essential, is an essential aspect of modern software development, and it is widely used across every company. So every company work with Git, and they do use Git command. So again, we mentioned them. We have add, commit, push, pull, and checkout. So what's the purpose of having add? So this is going to add comment. Git add commands add changes in the working directory to the staging area. So it's now going to tell Git that we want to include updates to a particular file. From here is the pseudocode for us to push to add this new update. Git commit. With git commit, we're now going to command records that the changes in the staging area to the repository. So each commit has a unique ID and it contains a message describing the changes. Again, we do have an example of how git commit works. Git push. With this command, we can upload local repository content to a remote repository. So it is used to transfer commit from one local machine to another. And pull is now used to fetch and integrate changes from a remote repository into our local machine, into our local repository, by the combination of git fetch and git merge. Checkout allows us to lock our document so no one else can now work on it. So this is used to switch branches or restore working tree files. It can be used to navigate between branches or to revert file to our previous state. So understanding and using git commands, it is effectively commands effectively. It is crucial for version control softwares. So by having git add, commit, push, pull, and checkout, each of them will now serve for distinct purposes that facilitates tracking, collaboration, and management of code changes. In our distinction task, we're now going to evaluate the value of the version control in the development of coded solution. So with this version control system, like Git, we know that this plays an indispensable role of modern software development. So they're going to provide numerous benefits that are significantly going to enhance the development process, collaboration, and maintenance of our code. So now we're going to evaluate these values of version control in development. So these are now the key benefit are improved collaboration, enhanced code quality, effective project management, backup and recovery, traceability and accountability, and experimentation and branching. So let's look into them. So what are the benefit of improved collaboration? So by having version control system, we're now going to allow multiple developers to work simultaneously on our project. So this is a huge benefit where we can minimize our developing time, and we can now achieve we can now build our software in less time. So the values of these are parallel development, conflict resolution, where with parallel development, developers can work on different features or bugs simultaneously. Conflict resolution where with version control system, we can now manage code, merge and conflict, allowing developers to resolve them simultaneously. Enhance code quality again. So by having version control system, we can now support the code with the review process, where peers can now review changes before they are integrated or even deployed into our production environment. So what are the values for this? Code reviews, continuous integration. Effective project management, where this is now going to provide tools for tracking progress, managing tasks, and coordinating releases. So it integrates with project management tools to provide a seamless workflow. Values for them are milestones and releases, and also we have benefit of task management, where these issues and tasks can be linked to specific commits, providing context and traceability. Backup and recovery. So version control system maintain a complete history of changes, allowing developers to revert to the previous version of the code if necessary. So the values and benefit of this are data protection and recovery system. Traceability and accountability, where every change in our version control system is now recorded within our metadata, and is now going to include who made the changes and when this was made and why. So the values, we now have an audit trail and accountability. experimentation on branches. So this allows developers to experiment with new features or changes without affecting our main code. And we can now create specific features, fix bugs, or even experiment. So the main values for these are safe experimentation and future isolation. So again, here we have a summary for all of them, of all of our benefits. So we can now conclude saying that version control systems are invaluable in the development of code solution, providing a framework for collaboration, code quality, project management, and recovery. So by using Git and other version control tools, development team can now work more efficiently, maintain high standards, and manage the project more effectively. So this was everything from our presentation. So I just want to quickly look into assignment discussion, just to look into task 3, where says the CTA has now approved the design and you need to code and test the solution. So we have to have the ability to code the solution in line with the design to meet the needs of our client brief, demonstrate an understanding of appropriate coding standards in Python by applying these in the solution, apply validation to improve integrity of inputs, create a comprehensive test plan to test the program that has been developed, ensure that the functionality, logic, data structure, and all the functions are tested appropriately, analyze test result against expected result to identify discrepancies and corrective action, carry out user testing. So just to know your skill set, are you able to set up your environment on Visual Studio Code and implement the methods to create an application?
Hi, Victor. Yeah, so I've still got all the like the Python sandbox environment and stuff from when I did the boot camp back in 2021, 2022. I forget which one it was. So I still have that on my laptop, so I can still run that. It's Python free.
Yeah, Python free.
Just
Yeah,
need to check that there hasn't been a newer version since then. I think it's on
yeah.
3.12 now, isn't it? So I think that's the latest version. I think it may already be that. If
I
not, then
think it's 3.6 or something.
3.6. I read that it was
3.6.
3.12 the other day. I don't know why. Um,
12. Yeah, sorry,
yeah,
12.6.
yeah,
Yeah,
3.126. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so yes,
yeah.
I
So if
think
you have,
that's the one I'm using. So or
oh,
had.
you already have in your machine. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if not, I know how to update it because I installed it last time when I put it on
Yeah.
boot camp. So I don't think the installation process has probably changed that much. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so no, that should be fine. And I said I still got some basic level of skill from when I did the boot camp. So yeah, I'll just have a crack at it and see how I get on.
Okay. Yeah. So if you have any issues with the code, just let me know.
Oh yeah, I will. Don't
Yeah.
worry,
Yeah.
Victor. I'm sure you'll probably get an email.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any question?
No, that's all. Yeah, all seems either fairly familiar. That the Git stuff
Yeah. Well,
that
when you
rings a
did the
bell.
level 3, you had a similar task to do, right?
Yeah,
For the programming one. Yeah.
Oh no,
Was
I
it?
did my level 3 was in applied statistics. So there was no programming in it.
Oh, you
Um,
did not include this. Okay.
no. There was no programming in the applied statistics level 3, but I have done the Python boot camp that I did a couple of
So
years
you
ago.
know all the fundamentals, like working with
Yeah,
variable, if
using
statement.
integers
Yeah,
and yeah, it was a while ago now, Boolean values and all that sort of stuff. So, um,
yeah.
yeah, I've got basic knowledge of it.
Okay, so if your functions when you're working with the constructor, you re realize that you're stuck, just pin me, then we can go through the code together.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful. Thank you. And obviously, I've got all the slides and I can rewatch
Yeah.
this video back if I need to. Um, yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Sorry I was late, Victor.
Oh, it's fine.
A long day today. I usually work from home remotely, but today I had to go into the office. It was an early start and I got back late. And when I
All
got
right,
home,
all
I
right.
just slumped on the sofa and then my mind went blank. And then I remembered, oh no, listen.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, ran to the laptop. So sorry about that.
No, no, it's fine, it's
I
fine.
set an alarm for tomorrow, so I won't forget.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much for making it at the end. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, catch you tomorrow. Have a
Okay,
good day, Victor. Take care.
you too. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.